Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys, let's learn. That's what we do, usually. My name's Connor if you're new. Hope everyone's doing well. Knowledge video, great channel, original link, top description, preemptive like. I don't know. Why couldn't Rome conquer Arabia? Well, I don't know is the answer, but I mean, every empire's territory has to stop somewhere. I am interested in as to what was happening in Arabia. I'm interested in pre-Islamic, what we today consider the Middle East, pre-Islamic, Middle East. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, I don't really know what was happening. I know there were kind of, I think, paganist. I don't know. The Persians, forget it. Let's learn.
At the height of its power, the mighty Roman Empire controlled a massive 5 million square kilometers. From Spain to Egypt, the Romans had demolished any armies brave enough to stand in their way. And yet, throughout its rule, there remained a glaring blank space on its map. It was the place that the Romans just couldn't conquer: Arabia. For the Romans, Arabia was the key to an endless supply of lavish riches, silks, and
India
spices,
and China.
gold and silver. To rule Arabia was to open up trade with the Far East, and from there, who knew? They simply had to have it. Unfortunately, it was never to be. Despite several attempts to invade and secure Arabian lands, the Romans could never quite pull it off. They were prevented by a number of factors, including climate, geography, poor decision-making, and a steely Arab resistance. When Augustus became the first Roman emperor in 17 BC, he assumed control of a massive empire. Roman rule spread as far west as Spain and down into North Africa, including Egypt. Confidence was sky high, and the Romans were hungry for more expansion. Their army was expertly drilled, powerfully armed, and at its peak had 500,000 soldiers. The Roman system was simple: expand the empire by simply rampaging over the top of other civilizations, then acquire all wealth from the new territories, and either recruit or enslave the newly conquered populations. This was a largely successful strategy. However, when the Romans turned their attention towards Arabia, they found it to be a desperately difficult region to take control of. The importance of establishing some kind of rule in Arabia was a result of the burgeoning trade with India and later China. Arabia formed the vital link between Asian civilizations to the east and the Rome.
When did China become the sort of giant trade hub that it would become in the... When was Marco Polo a thing? So India is the more ancient trading partner with Europe, which would make sense. They are closer. But when I think of the spice trade and the Silk Road and whatnot, I do think of post-Roman Empire. So I'd be interested into, the extent of that trade in this time. You do have control of the Red Sea here, or, I mean, you border the Red Sea, and so I'm sure you're the most powerful entity that borders the Red Sea, and therefore into the Arabian Sea, and to India. But I don't usually think of a great maritime people when I think of the Romans. Ironically, since they completely controlled the Mediterranean. I could be wrong. I don't know.
Controlled areas of much of Europe to the west. Rome's upper classes had acquired expensive tastes, and when Augustus became emperor, the demand for exotic spices and silks was very much on the rise. Some of the sought-after spices, such as pepper and cinnamon, were traded with India, while others, such as frankincense and myrrh, were only found in southern Arabia, around today's Yemen. The southern Arabs, the Sabine...
Like gold, frankincense, and myrrh? That story about Jesus' birth, like the Christian story. There's like a Family Guy joke saying of the three kings, and like one had gold, the other had frankincense, the other had myrrh, and the two who had myrrh and frankincense were like mad in this sketch because it's like, oh, you had to bring the expensive gift to make us look stupid. But I guess that frankincense and myrrh were like equally as valuable as gold back then. So
In Arabia,
not
around
positive.
today's Yemen. The southern Arabs, the Sabaeans, transported their spices via an inland trail known as the incense route, adjacent to the Red Sea. The incense route wound up to northwestern Arabia, near Petra, or modern-day Jordan. The Nabateans had settled in this region, and they and their Sabaean contacts soon became extremely wealthy on the back of the lucrative trade with Rome. When Rome took control of Egypt in 30 BC, it opened up huge markets for trade between the West and the East. Trade with India and China was now possible via the Red and Arabian sea routes, while overland routes from China into Central Asia and then Arabia were also starting to take shape. Although Rome had a small foothold in Arabia, the Romans wanted to set up permanent settlements throughout the region, especially in southern Arabia, which had ports lined along the Arabian Sea. The Romans saw the Arabian Peninsula as having three regions: Arabian Petria in the north, the vast desert Arabia in the center, and the prosperous and southern Arabia. The Romans called this southern region Arabia Felix, meaning happy or lucky Arabia, because of the region's perceived affluence and economic potential. Augustus wanted to cash in on this part of Arabia and expand Rome's borders. The Romans fancied their chances because it was before the rise of Islam, and Arabia had no central governing body or army. Augustus assumed his vast legions of troops would once again march into a new territory, snap up the spoils, and add another Roman territory to the map. And so, in 26 BC, he ordered one of his Egyptian governors, Gaius Gallus, to head an expedition to southern Arabia. Augustus's instructions to Gallus were simple: set up client-state relations, or
By the way, that shows you how a sort of monotheistic large religion will outcompete the other religions that are more polytheistic, and often it's easier to just say like, okay, there's one God here. How they would outcompete the other religion. I'm going to something that isn't that important right now. Sorry.
take control. Rome had already set up a client-state system with the Nabateans in northwestern Arabia in 62 BC. The Roman general Scaurus had besieged the Nabatean city of Petra, but was fast running out of supplies, and his troops were wilting under the fierce heat. The Nabatean king Aretas III struck up a sly deal with the Roman leader. They decided that for an agreed-upon sum, or bribe, the Romans would withdraw, and the Nabateans would be permitted to continue as an independent client state of Rome. Aretas paid Scaurus a generous amount in gold and silver, which Scaurus happily accepted. This allowed the Romans to begin making inroads into northern Arabia, based on the Nabatean submission. When Gallus set forth from today's Suez in 25 BC, he had a legionnaire of some 10,000 soldiers, plus another 1,000 Nabateans. Supporting the mission were Nabatean guides and supply trucks. Gallus had also organized for supply ships to follow him down the Red Sea, so the Roman troops could head to the coast and access supplies as needed. On paper, it looked great. However, right from the outset, the Arabian invasion seemed doomed. The Roman troops crossed the Red Sea from Egypt and disembarked at Lus Qom in northwestern Arabia. Already, scores of men were stricken with stomach viruses, cramps, and fevers that had quickly spread amongst the tightly compressed legions of troops. No sooner had they staggered off the ships and prepared for their southern assault than the Romans were hit by a plague. It was thought to have been caused by a mix of the local waters and plants, and pretty soon, Gallus had to call time and wait until his troops recuperated. Hardly ideal. When the worst of the plague had ended several weeks later, Gallus rallied his troops and outlined the tactics. The plan was to head south to modern-day Yemen and take the city of Marib. The Nabateans provided Gallus with a friendly and unassuming guide named Silius. Despite his charms, Silas was to play a vital part in the failure of the Gallus-led invasion.
Betrays him in the end.
Silas was instructed to lead the Romans along roughly the same path as used by traders on the incense route. Sources at the time, such as Pliny the Elder and Gallus's friend Strabo, had both estimated the trip as needing at least 5 camel stops, which was a considerable trek. The Romans, largely ignorant of the Arabian geography and brutal desert heat, were about to enter hell itself. Instead of taking Gallus and his men directly to the southern tip, Silas marched the Romans into the unforgiving desert region of Arabia, where the Roman soldiers soon began to buckle and wilt. The heat was like nothing the Romans had encountered, and before long, hundreds were dead from heat exhaustion and thirst.
I'm just imagining a guy lead the Romans like more inland, and the Romans being like, well, what are we doing here? Oh, we just have to go through this way over here. And then you get you lead them a sufficient amount into the desert, and then you just leave. And it's like, where's he going? He's not coming. He's leaving us here. And now we're in a ocean of sand, and we're gonna die.
Not only were Gallus's men deprived of water, but Silas had taken them away from their coastal supply ships, further exacerbating the situation. Why the deception? The Nabateans were fiercely proud of their independence and resented the Roman assumption that they would assist in fighting against other Arabs. Silas continued southward, always promising that riches were soon to come. Despite the immense hardship, the Romans were able to easily overpower Arab settlements, and the push continued to southern Arabia. Cities such as Medina, Mecca, and Negrana all fell to the battle-hardened Roman forces, but the desert and lack of food and water were adding up. Gallus was taking serious losses due to the conditions, but Silas insisted that they push on south. By the time the Romans finally reached the southern...
If you're so much more powerful than the other tribes and men and fighting forces in the area, then why do you really need a guide? This might sound stupid, and there might be an easy answer for me, but why not just stick along the coast all the way down, and then go over? It's not like you have to traverse this area because there's no other way. You know what I mean? Why wouldn't they just continue marching down the Red Sea, where they have easy supply from their ships? Am I being crazy?
Capital of Marib. They were out on their feet. It had taken a staggering 6 months to march from the northern tip of the peninsula to the south, a journey that was usually only a matter of weeks. Gallus brought his men in and laid out his plans. They were to form a siege of Marib and eventually take control of what they'd marched so long to attain. However, the Roman troops were exhausted, and many were seriously ill. To make matters worse, the southern Sabaean Arabs were well organized and had the wealth to construct daunting 6-meter defensive walls around their capital city. Their soldiers were rested, well-fed, and fresh, ready for a fight. The Romans lasted only 6 days before Gallus conceded defeat and ordered a humiliating retreat back to Egypt. Not surprisingly, there was no welcoming party for Gallus. Instead, he was relieved of his duties by an enraged Augustus, who started contemplating the next best way to gain a foothold in Arabia. It would be more than a century later, but the Romans tried again to invade Arabia. This time, at least initially, they had some success. In 107 AD, Roman Emperor Trajan had begun a serious assault to the east. He was eyeing the independent Nabatean region of northwestern Arabia. The Romans had previously seized the area under the command of Scaurus, but had allowed the Nabateans to remain independent on the proviso that they paid for the privilege. When the Nabatean king Rabble died in 106, the Romans moved in. They already had troops stationed in nearby Syria and Egypt, and were easily able to annex the Nabatean kingdom. It became the province of Arabia Petrea, and swallowed up portions of modern-day Syria, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. From here, the Romans were able to solidify their position, and for a time, the northwestern chunk of Arabia was under Roman rule. This is what the Romans were after: partial access to the huge amount of trade.
It is also considered that during this time in Portus Faracinus, Pharosan Islands, a Roman garrison was established during the 2nd century AD.
What the Romans were after: partial access to the huge amount of trade passing through northern Arabia and the Western empires via the Red Sea. The Romans prospered in the 2nd century, accumulating revenue from traders passing through Arabia Petrea and forming their own trade routes to link up with the east. They formed a handy alliance with the Ghassanid Arabs, who moved up from the south into Syria. The Ghassanids helped the Romans keep their Arab armies at bay and maintain control of northern Arabia. In the late 2nd century, Emperor Septimus Severus saw firsthand how volatile the region was becoming. He led forces into Syria to put a stop to aggression. This was to be as big as it got in terms of the Roman presence in Arabia. In the late 3rd century, Emperor Diocletian decided to expand Arabia Petrea to include parts of Palestine, and the Arabian region of the empire remained a relatively stable Roman stronghold.
I'm also wondering why they wouldn't just kind of go down the Tigris and Euphrates, which I'm sure are some of the most mapped out and well-known rivers in the world at the time, and just kind of connect up to the Persian Gulf, where it seems like you'd have an even better access to India than if you had full control of the Red Sea, you know? But you do have you have Parthia there, so...
Until the rise of the Arab Muslim Caliphate. Relatively stable Roman stronghold until the rise of the Arab Muslim Caliphates in the 7th century. So why then didn't the Romans continue their expansion into Arabia?
Other issues? I mean, they're not exactly in a... This is a thing about the Roman Empire, is that you have so... Obviously extremely powerful, but along with the populations you have to already control within your territory, I mean, there's got to be so many areas of your outer periphery that has powers that you have to worry about. And so I'm assuming you're only going to have a really small window to where you have relative peace and stability in other areas to do this.
What stopped them from completely conquering the Arab territories? In the end,
Other issues?
It was a combination of things. First was the effort and manpower required. Rome simply didn't have the resources. Running an empire is a challenging job, and with its territories stretched as far as Gaul to the west, the thought of further expansion eastwards was probably a bridge too far.
Yeah, and even if they conquered Arabia, the next question is going to be, well, why didn't they conquer India? If they conquer India, why didn't they conquer Southeast Asia? It's just going to be a recurring question.
Rome had its hands full with the constant repelling of Germanic tribes to the west, and to attempt a full invasion of Arabia would have been too optimistic, to say the least. Added to that were the constant battles fought with Persian armies, who both sought to wrest control of Roman Arabia. Then there were the smaller bands of Arab forces, often fighting amongst each other and resistant to Roman rule. When the Muslim conquest of the Levant kicked off in 634, the Romans were still recuperating from bitter fighting with the Persians. Under the command of the Rashidun Caliphate, Arab Muslims came together to form a formidable alliance that was to ultimately prove too much for the Romans. The Arab armies marched into Roman-occupied Arabia via the Syrian desert, completely taking the Romans by surprise. The Arab Muslims were simply too well trained and too great in number, and
Excuse me. Also, they have a single religion, which I think is super powerful. When you have a single religion, I think especially a monotheistic religion, because even when you have a similar religion, but you have multiple gods, then you have different people who might revere certain gods over the others, and then you might have some conflict there. But when you have a monotheistic religion, I feel like that's the natural evolution of religion. and which is in my eyes a benefit to governing an area when everyone in that area, without you even needing to really go in there and solidify it, if you have a agreed upon religion, then there's a sort of authority that as long as you claim to be for and kind of ahead of, then everyone's going to have reason to fall in line. And when the Islam comes along, I think Islam is a super weapon for Arabia that they then use later on. But
soon took
for another
control
time.
of what had been Arabia Petria. The Arabs were also used to the desert, the heat, and how to survive in such a trying environment. This was another major deterrent for the Romans. The desert, the heat, and the lack of water. Arabia just wasn't worth the effort.
I feel like that can be a really quick answer. By the way, guys, I don't know. I'm trying to learn more. If I say something you disagree with, please call me out on it. But I feel like that can be the answer for almost any geopolitical reason for not doing something. It's not worth it because of many reasons. So, very interesting video. Knowledgia, fantastic channel. Love them. Love you guys. Hope you're doing well. Would appreciate any comments down below. And hopefully I'll see you guys next time. We'll keep on learning. Bye.